Let's get started. So thank you everyone for joining today's session. We're going to be doing a little bit of a review in today's session. We're going to be going through some insights from this year and what's next to come for human risk management in 2026. So I am Hetty, the Channel Marketing Manager here at usecure. If you do have any questions today, feel free to pop them in the chat box, or there's a question box as well. We're going to have a bit of a Q&A session at the end of today's webinar. So feel free to pop them in there as you go along, and then we can come to those at the end of the session. You will also receive a recording of today's session post webinar, so you should get that within 24 hours of this session today via email, and we'll also pop some useful links in there as well, which will help touch on a little bit of what we're going to be discussing today. But without any further ado, I will hand over to our Chief Revenue Officer, Nahil, to begin.
Thanks, Hetty. And yeah, thank you everyone for joining us for our last enablement session of the year. So yeah, my name's Nahil. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at usecure. Just to set the tone to start off with exactly what we'll be covering, we've got a broad agenda here. So the main sort of theme throughout today is understanding what and reviewing what the key trends have been over the last year. So we'll run through 6 of the key lessons that we can identify from 2025 when it comes to human risk. We will incorporate some elements of how MSPs are tackling that human risk, as we're aware of these threats, as we're spotting these new trends. What evolutions are we seeing in the channel to help to combat those? We'll then look ahead to 2026. We want to try and be a bit more proactive, to try and understand what is likely to develop in this space. So we'll go through threats, trends, and innovations. What we'll then go on to touch on is some practical steps to strengthen resilience when it comes to human risk in light of these trends, and also touch on a few developments that we have coming up within usecure to help you to evolve your MSP. So obviously, a lot of you on today's session will be existing usecure partners, but I also appreciate that, again, given the topic covered today, some of you may not be too familiar with this. So I just want to spend a little bit of time giving a bit of an introduction to us as a company. So our focus at usecure is all about human risk. We want to understand the cybersecurity posture of each individual employee, and then deliver effective awareness programs to reduce the risks that we identify. We ultimately want to identify gaps in the employee base and then remediate those gaps. usecure is designed for the channel. We know traditional awareness programs can be tough, both for the clients but also the MSP. Clients are often put off by generic, overly long traditional training. MSPs are often put off by the admin overhead that often comes with actually administering those awareness training and simulated phishing programs. So usecure is designed to combat this. Awareness programs that actually enable behavior change, that go beyond just security awareness training and simulated phishing, and don't need to be babysat by the MSP. As a result of this, we now empower almost 500,000 end users globally. We partner with almost 2,000 MSPs. This is our sole focus, our specialism as a company. So we speak day in, day out with partners and clients to understand the human risk concerns they have, to make sure that our program is adapting in line with the real life threats that they're experiencing. So hopefully that gives some context about us as a company, again, for those of you who maybe don't work with us, and ultimately help to highlight why we're in a position to talk about insights in human risk. And that, again, is the goal of today's session: to understand recent trends, to look ahead at the upcoming ones, and provide some insight into how to adapt and essentially get ahead of them. So before we go over the specific trends themselves, whilst we're looking at this as a general review for the channel, it's also important to keep in mind how we distill this to our clients. It's something that we're very conscious of internally at usecure. If these trends can become really complex, really fast-paced, evolve incredibly quickly for us, we have to consider how we communicate this to our clients, especially if they're not as technical, not as IT confident, not security savvy. To us, the sort of link between technological trends, technological evolution, and real life trends that people are experiencing can be quite clear. The link can often be quite smooth. To our clients, that link can sometimes be a bit broken and need a bit more of an explanation to be able to understand why they're experiencing what they're experiencing. But what is clear to our clients is the real life trends that they are experiencing. So we need to make sure that when we speak to our clients about those trends, we're using everyday scenarios they can relate to and tapping into those experiences that they're reporting. If we do that effectively, we then have a much more engaged audience and one that is much more likely to take on board the advice we give about upcoming trends, but also, again, how they should be adapting their processes to combat them. So that takes us on to 2025's biggest human risk lessons. Again, as we know, things develop incredibly quickly, so it was tricky to narrow this down. But we've got 6 core fundamentals that we feel essentially best represent the shift in our industry over the last 12 months or so. One thing that has absolutely stayed the same is phishing remains the #1 threat. 85% of incident hit businesses faced phishing. Phishing has always been the core threat, the most visible, the most likely to grab an end user and get them to compromise data. And ultimately, it's because attackers don't need technical exploits for it. They exploit judgment. They invoke emotional response, and they encourage people to act without thinking, essentially. Even though we've known phishing has been such a prominent threat throughout the entire period of human risk management, the statistics, if anything, show that we're getting worse at spotting them. And that's partly because of, even with having improved filtering, improved AI-based detection, improved infrastructure, social engineering is still an incredibly easy entry point for attackers. So we see year after year, phishing remains the most common and the most disruptive attack for organizations. We'll go over, you might see on the slide, we touch on AI phishing a little bit later. We'll also touch on it a little bit in the 2026 looking ahead. But at its fundamental core, phishing is still the major concern and the most prominent threat that we are trying to solve. For MSPs, when we think about how this impacts us, how this impacts how we should be delivering services to our clients, it's a critical shift. Email security tools, infrastructure are still absolutely vital and will always be critical. But user behavior is also a deciding factor that goes alongside it, and if anything, is becoming a more prominent factor. So instead of relying on the infrastructure, we need to make sure that we have that ecosystem of human risk supplementing technology. Unfortunately, we also know humans are fallible. Humans make mistakes. Humans lose focus and don't always pay attention. And the point #2 is about human error. 96% of companies exposed data through misdirected email, whether that's copying in somebody that they shouldn't have done because they added a typo in the name, or maybe attaching the wrong invoice to a client as a PDF, rather than taking the time to make sure that they are attaching the right document. Outbound email mistakes are probably one of the most underreported risks across all industries. And ultimately, because there are no security controls, they originate from a trusted user, it increases the chances of this being a risk and one that becomes harder to control. Obviously, an incident like this can be very damaging. We find that if there is a malicious actor who causes a cyber incident, as long as processes have been followed, there is a certain degree of empathy, right? We all appreciate that as long as we're doing the steps that we should be doing to empower end users to get the infrastructure right, malicious actors can sometimes still find a way. What can be harder to explain away is if a cyber incident has occurred because a rep wasn't paying attention and attached an invoice to the wrong customer, or attached a spreadsheet they shouldn't have done and ended up sharing customer data to other customers. So what this reinforces is the need to look beyond attack prevention. It's still absolutely crucial to obviously prevent the attacks, but we also need to focus on day-to-day user behavior when handling data, on making sure that staff members are exhibiting good habits so that even when they've got a day that's back-to-back full of meetings and they're trying to squeeze in an email when they've got 5 minutes before their next, they still have the automatic processes that allow them to be more secure, more savvy, and less likely to leak data by accident. We also know that identity attacks overtook malware. It's a huge shift in how attackers are operating. 79% of intrusions were malware free. So instead, they are largely skipping malware and going straight for credentials and trust gaps. MFA is naturally incredibly important, something that should be enforced on all critical systems. But it's the behavior around MFA, which is where it tends to break down. Attackers know that people tend to dislike inconveniences, and MFA, even though it's important, can be an inconvenience. And so they prey on that by doing things like MFA fatigue attacks, by using social engineering to try and circumvent MFA controls. So what this means is, again, because 79% of intrusions are malware free, identity has become a critical perimeter. And identity management is shaped hugely by how the users actually act. Yes, we should enforce and really encourage MFA adoption, but we should also raise expectations on identity hygiene processes in our clients to make sure that the users are aware about how MFA can be used against them, the type of social engineering attacks that can be used with it, and that they can't just rely on the infrastructure around them. They have to be an active part within. Point number 4 is AI phishing. So phishing was up by 442%. One of the things that has always worked in our favor when it comes to phishing attacks is the barrier to entry. So even 2 or 3 years ago, to send a targeted bespoke spear phishing attack to an end user was an incredibly labor intensive process. So spray and pray attacks were much more common, as we've all seen, and it would be much more rare to see a more targeted spear phishing attack. Now with AI tooling which we use for our own productivities, attackers naturally are doing the same. And it essentially is lowering those barriers to entry. It's lowering the amount of labor that's required to make these targeted, tailored attacks. Anyone can now create a perfectly crafted, word perfect phishing email or use voice lures. Phishing has absolutely exploded because the technology has exploded. It only takes around 5 seconds of somebody's voice to be able to mimic it almost perfectly. And obviously we do webinars like this, we make ourselves more visible. There's a huge amount of data out there on all of us. Naturally, attackers then take that information and can flip it for their purposes. So that 442% increase really reflects how there's excess in data, but also attackers are more confident with being able to use it effectively. So what we have to consider is traditional training that teaches users to spot red flags, to look out for these normal social engineering cues. If AI removes those red flags, the training is then redundant, essentially. It's not actually preparing them for the real life threats that they are experiencing. So we need to make sure that as we're delivering awareness programs, that we are training and testing in ways that evolve and mirror attacker capability rather than lagging behind it, which is often the case. Another really interesting development over the last 12 months is consent phishing. There's been a huge surge in these type of attacks. Attackers are essentially no longer asking for credentials. They are instead asking for access. So these consent attacks, these consent links, the CodeFish example was a huge one a couple of months ago. They're incredibly difficult to spot because they use legitimate sources. So the attacker registers a malicious app on something like Enter ID. They build it to look like a common service. They then send a permission request to the user through Enter ID, who then typically accepts those permissions because it's come from a legitimate source in Microsoft. So the actual link that they've engaged with, where they've accepted the authentication, is actually legitimate, but the product it's linked to is led by a malicious actor. Once that's approved, attackers then gain access to emails, files, Teams chats, and there's no need to enter a password or enable MFA because the user has given them that access. So again, it comes down to coaching, to making sure that we are communicating to our clients and essentially coaching users on when to approve access, when to question request permissions prompts, how to make sure that they are actually allowing access to the correct applications and to legitimate applications and not just always taking those requests at face value. And then finally, in 2026, what links in quite nicely with that is we know MFA interception attacks have scaled up. Whisper 2FA was a big thing in the last year. It was used in around 1 million attacks. I think that was just since June, which just goes to show again the sheer scale of these attacks that they can deploy. So again, it's been a common theme. MFA is absolutely essential, but we know attackers are intercepting codes or pressurizing users in real time. So the workflow of this is say recipient gets a phishing attack. Let's say they use 365 and they get a phishing attack looking like it's come from 365. The phishing attack will be incredibly accurate, it'll be very personalized, given the AI tooling they can leverage. The user is more likely to fall for it and enter their credentials, and that then passes those credentials over to the attacker. The interception kits then automate that trigger login to Microsoft, and that then triggers an MFA request to the victim. The victim has tried to log into Microsoft as far as they're aware. So the MFA request they get that comes through, which is from a malicious source, it fits their activity. They're expecting that that code to come through. So they enter their authentication code, and rather than verifying themselves, they've effectively verified the attacker. Tools like Whisper MFA kits, they automate this session hijacking. They capture those codes automatically and instantly. And therefore, again, it's a case of the user giving access to the attacker. Even educated users can fall victim, especially if the attacker is impersonating IT support, if they're using urgency to try and get them to do this a lot quicker. And again, this comes down to the idea of making sure that we're not just relying on the technology, that we're not just relying on MFA alone to do the job, that we are training behavior around it, training good hygiene, and making sure that people know how to react to unusual prompts, to things that have incredible amount of urgency, and those login requests that maybe don't feel quite right. But it's about developing that not mistrust, but that slight skepticism. And that only comes if the users have been made aware about the fact that they have a responsibility and that these kind of attacks are becoming much more common. So again, overall, we know it can be quite overwhelming to keep track of these latest trends and technologies. We have to cut through the noise. We have to try and identify those that are the most prevalent, the most relevant, understand how they apply to our clients, and then again, make sure that we're able to communicate that relevancy in an effective way. If we go to a client and we talk to them about consent phishing, we're likely to get a blank face coming back to us, especially if they're not technical. You could argue that they don't really need to know the technical terminology behind it. What they need to know, or what they care about feeling, is reassurance that their MSP is across this, that they understand the challenges that the organization faces, the type of threats they might face, can help them to navigate those challenges, and is also looking forward at what might be evolving and trying to proactively set them up for success. So that is essentially a summary of the big things that we've seen in 2025. And as we look ahead to 2026, it seems like the rate of travel isn't really slowing. In security, so much of it can be reactive. We see the attackers get first move advantage, we see the trends, and then we adapt with our processes. And that is naturally going to be the case a large amount of the time. But we also, if we can pan ahead, if we can use our insights as to what's happened over the last 12 months and beyond, and try and use that to inform the next steps, we can try and get ahead of the curve a little bit more. So that's what we wanted to do today. Predicting future trends is always tricky. This might come back to bite me and look like a fool's errand, but we can use what we've seen and over the last sort of 2 or 3 years in particular, and be pretty confident on these 4 key points. And a few of these points essentially build on what we've seen in 2025, but talk about them moving into a new phase. So a big one is in 2026, it is highly likely that AI-led phishing will feel pretty much indistinguishable. It will be context perfect emails that mimic real people. We've touched on this with the phishing side of things, but essentially in 2026, the evolution of generative AI will essentially reduce and remove pretty much all of those traditional phishing red flags. Things like spelling mistakes, errors in tone, in timing, in context. Most of those, if not all, will be taken away pretty easily based on just what's out there publicly in the digital world already. So not only will the actual delivery of the attack be incredibly tailored and incredibly sophisticated, by leveraging the dark web, the content will be incredibly personalized. So an example that we often give is, let's say that I sign up for HelloFresh for food delivery. And let's say that I get a food delivery every Thursday, every single week. If HelloFresh suffers a cyber attack, there's a good chance that myself as a subscriber, I will have my email address, my home address, maybe some basic billing information made publicly available, maybe even some redacted card information, depending on the level of the attack. If I'm an attacker, I want to get hold of that information because that is contextual gold dust. So they will leverage AI scraping tools to find that information in the dark web, potentially before I even know it's been made available on there. They will be able to collate that information in seconds and spool up a targeted phishing attack based on my email address, my buying habits, and my home address. So they will send me an email looking like it's come from HelloFresh with the formatting and the branding absolutely bang on, because they can essentially use the source material and replicate it quickly in AI, using AI, sorry. I then get that email through and it will look like it's come from HelloFresh, and it will say, in order to receive your next scheduled delivery on Thursday, we need you to update your card details within 24 hours as they have now expired. Please click on this link in order for us to be able to deliver your next package as expected. For myself as a potential user, the amount of context that is leading that attack is much more likely to grab my attention. Whereas if they sent me a phishing attack from Gusto, if I don't use that and use HelloFresh, it's not going to get the same level of attachment. And as I sort of touched on earlier, this has always been the type of attack that malicious actors have utilized. The difference now is the sheer scalability of that, because as they're running that attack on me from that breach, they can also do it concurrently against thousands of others. Whereas previously they would have to make it a very manual attack with manual research, manually spooling it up, and then getting it in front of me. So what this all means is that as users, we can't rely on instinct, we can't rely on language cues. Phishing is a behavioral thing. It's not a literacy thing, it's a behavioral, a habitual thing. Also, what it means is that as these threats become more sophisticated, as we touched on earlier, phishing has always been a consistent problem. Social engineering attacks, phishing attacks have always been an incredibly prominent way of an attacker gaining access. And if they were having a high level of success with spray and pray attacks, chances are with these AI-led phishing attacks, they're going to get a higher level of engagement. Obviously, we should be implementing certain measures, which we'll touch on shortly, to help reduce that risk. But we also need to be planning ahead, and we need to be realistic and honest with our clients and make sure that we're preparing them for a situation where the phishing detection might be post-click rather than pre-click, and making sure that we have the right structures and processes in place so that if an incident does occur, we have a ready-made process that we can follow to reduce the impact of that incident. Staying on the theme of AI, shadow AI is something which is absolutely growing as a sort of governance concern. So what we're finding happening is employees are becoming increasingly reliant on AI. They are becoming increasingly comfortable with entering details into AI that they probably shouldn't be doing. Let's say they have a big internal meeting coming up and they want to make sure that they're running some financial numbers by ChatGPT to make sure that they're interpreting the data properly and they're extrapolating it correctly. Maybe they enter some information about the company roadmap as well, and they want to sort of vet and get a second opinion from AI about whether that roadmap is as robust as it should be. As a lot of us are aware, those tools often then store those inputs. They train the language model on those inputs, and they can sometimes also use it to inform future answers. So if an external vendor, if a competitor, if a client, then out of curiosity, search for that kind of data, there is a chance that information then will be used to inform the AI's response. Obviously, that information should be kept internal, it should be kept private, and a user has, without really realizing the connotations, has accidentally given that data away. The majority of the time, they are not doing that maliciously. They are just unaware about that flow and also about what expectations there are on them as an employee when it comes to utilizing these tools. These tools aren't going away. They're only going to be utilized more frequently. So let's make sure that we are helping to guide staff members on how to do so safely. Essentially, that shadow AI then grows outside of policy and security controls. It becomes very hard to govern and track. What we should do is make sure that we're building usage guidelines and that we are monitoring risky behavior as much as possible. So that staff members, for example, if they are using GPT, are using a company account where chats are logged and we can see what type of things people are actually posting, and making sure that, again, processes are mapped out clearly and staff members are opting into those processes so that they're confirming that they know what's expected of them. Moving on then, so we also predict that MFA interception will become more routine. And this again is building on the whisper 2FA stuff that we spoke about in the previous slide. Attackers don't always bother with breaking through MFA. They often bypass it by intercepting or socially engineering users within their login. And we feel like this is going to become much more common as attackers exploit MFA fatigue. These bypass kits like Whisper2FA simulate those login portals. They capture those credentials en masse. And then even those users who aren't sharing passwords because they've had it hammered into them that sharing a password is a complete no-go. And they would never go through with that request. It would always twig a red flag. Those users maybe haven't had the same amount of reinforcement about MFA prompting. And therefore, it's a vulnerability that maybe hasn't been checked. It's a habit that hasn't been formed, particularly under pressure, which naturally attackers are trying to leverage all the time. And that then makes this a gap in their cyber resilience. And again, what that then means is we can have the most solid identity setup, the most rigid infrastructure, but human behavior can undo all of that good work. The final prediction for 2026 is deepfake calling going much more mainstream, becoming much more common, with deepfaking tooling allowing attackers to mimic execs, IT support, vendors, suppliers, customers with incredible accuracy. Again, as we spoke about in the last slide, phishing has gone up by 442%. We feel like deepfake attacks are also going to go up on a similar level. And they'll often be again tied to an emotional thing such as payments or access requests, and that then helps to make them feel more urgent and more convincing, essentially. So what we need to do in the channel again is coach staff, build those habits, train them to challenge unexpected calls, even if the person on the other end sounds exactly like the person that they would expect. Verify it with another route, make sure they're not taking it at face value, because again, the technology is here that makes these attacks incredibly easy. So as we look through those 4 predictions 2026, so AI phishing becoming much more prominent, shadow AI through tooling, creating new risks, MFA interception and deepfakes both growing exponentially. The common thread there is sophistication at scale, particularly across the AI phishing, MFA interception, and deepfake calls. Again, previously what worked in our favor was how time-consuming these bespoke attacks were. And hopefully what we've covered in the last few slides highlights just how much these barriers have been lowered. And these are not niche attacks. These are things that we see in reality. This can also, again, be pretty overwhelming. The variety of these attack and threat vectors is huge. The evolution of them within those vectors is absolutely rapid. And that can make it really difficult to keep track of the latest trends, keep up with the latest best practices. So it's important as we look forward at these expected developments from malicious actors, we also take stock about what we can do to stem the tide and ultimately help to secure our clients as well. So we can now run through how MSPs can stay ahead in 2026. We've broken this down into 5 critical principles to follow. Irrespective of how complex the threats are, if we're making sure to implement these 5 fundamentals across our client base, then we're building resilience and a human layer of security. So if you're thinking about where to start, this hopefully will form a useful checklist. Again, a recurring theme throughout, as we talked about those threats and how to mitigate them, is training. It will, if we're talking about human behavior, we need to make sure that we are developing continual habits. So we want short, ongoing training on things like AI phishing and deepfakes, because again, in 2026, they'll become more prominent and they will rely on that emotional realism. As we sort of touched on, a lot of us are aware that traditional training wasn't really fit for purpose when the attacks were quite generic. And if they haven't evolved in the last 2 or 3 years, the attacks absolutely have. So we want to make sure that we're bridging that gap. We want to make sure that we are encouraging genuine behavior change. The best way of doing that is through bite-sized continual reinforcement. So micro learning that builds habits, that reinforces best practices, that makes this a continual process, are much more likely to lead to genuine behavior change. We're not trying to tick a box, we are trying to ultimately make that organization more secure. So the goal is to build instinct. It's to develop automatic behaviors where, as they have a busy day, as they're caught up by different things, as an attack that is expertly crafted and designed to get an emotional response, it meets a wall of process of somebody that has instinct, that's had it drilled into them about how they should handle these situations. Something which I think people have often struggled with when it comes to human risk is measuring it. Measuring risk, measuring people is really tricky. Contextualizing them, operationalizing them is incredibly tough, but it's vital if we're able to show progress and understand gaps. So we need to treat human risk and human behavior like any other risk metric. It should be measurable, it should be trendable, and it should be reportable. So human risk then moves away from being just a tick box of did they do the training, to then including things and considering things like, did they report a phishing attack? Are they showing proactivity if they get a suspicious email through to report it to their IT department? Who is engaging with PDFs that we send them as suspicious phishing attacks and simulated phishing attacks? Who is ignoring policies that we're sending to try and get them to build a culture of awareness? Who is repeatedly making risky decisions like not setting up MFA or not resetting their password, for example? If we can start to report on these kind of things, if we can contextualize and operationalize risk, it gives an incredible amount of insight. It moves clients from, I think we have a people problem, I think there's a human risk issue somewhere, to I know exactly where the gaps are, both on an individual user basis and on a competency basis. If we can contextualize that risk, we can then demonstrate the return on investment, and you can show that reduction in risk over time. What we also want to do in 2026 is strengthen that identity hygiene. As you mentioned before, with 79% of intrusions being malware free, identity is the critical thing that attackers are trying to exploit. And we've spoken about things like MFA fatigue, the OAuth abuse. Identity controls have to be paired with awareness programs. So we should make sure that our clients are reinforcing strong password posture, that we are making sure they're resetting passwords and setting it something unique, using a password manager, resetting passwords semi-frequently, all those kind of good practices, we should be reinforcing them. We should be reinforcing re-authentication habits, how they handle suspicious MFA prompts, and if we can help the end users to understand when they're being manipulated on things like MFA and how those type of things manifest, we again build a culture of accountability, of proactivity, and of engagement. A common issue with human risk is the end users not actually realizing that they have an active part to play when it comes to security. So if we can try to build that culture, build that engagement and that understanding over time through things like deploying policies, through things like training, we then have a user layer that supplements the infrastructure that we put in place. A big point, something that we're speaking about a lot at the moment, is compliance. Compliance is a huge wave. It is only getting bigger. And essentially, it is tying user behavior, company policies to things like NIS2, ISO 27001, Cyber Essentials, SOC 2, Essential 8, DORA. There are endless acronyms and frameworks, both globally and in specific territories. And all of these are explicitly talking about human risk. So whereas previously, even just a couple of years ago, the things that we're speaking about now were purely security best practices. Now they are mandated, government mandated, compliance mandated processes that clients should have in place. It essentially validates what we're talking about today as something which our clients have to act upon. So those frameworks, again, are increasingly referencing the human element with behavior, training evidence, reporting, policy acknowledgement, making sure that we have the right processes in place and people are opting in. For us in the channel, it's a brilliant opportunity because, again, we know compliance isn't going anywhere. Compliance also is becoming much more wide-ranging. It's applying to SMBs more than ever, whereas previously it might have been more focused on public entities and larger private entities. Now it's becoming a universal standard, a universal expectation. There's a statistic that we speak about where 86% of SMBs feel like they will need external help when it comes to compliance. And if we know cybersecurity compliance is ramping up, and we know human risk compliance is ramping up, it makes complete sense they would turn to their MSP for support. It's a fantastic opportunity for us in the channel to address that risk, to show that we can understand the difficulties in compliance and provide them with a step-by-step process to get themselves aligned. If we get that right, it positions MSPs not only as a security provider, but also as a governance partner. So yeah, clear workflows, training, continual reinforcement, these are all things that are discussed consistently as something that orders will be looking at as part of things like NIS2 and DORA, for example. And then finally, what links into that is the importance of evidencing progress. We want to generate risk insights as automatically as possible and provide proof of improvement. It links into what we're talking about with making people measurable, with building compliance into culture. It all interlinks. So clients are increasingly expecting visibility. They don't necessarily need to know the intricacies of their human risk and the threat vectors, but they want to see summary data, see trending data, and they want that accessible. And in the channel, we don't want to spend time sifting through spreadsheets to try and generate those ourselves. So we want to have automatic reports generated for us, providing that risk insight. It allows us then to scale, to reinforce the value of the product, and ultimately cement this as just a regular part of modern business. So if we can evidence that progress, it then really reinforces the value that we're driving. So those 5 fundamental steps are things I would absolutely say all MSPs should be looking into, if not already deploying. And if you were a bit uncertain as I went through the presentation about what to do with the information, about how to take that and apply it in positive ways, what steps you can take as a response, hopefully this slide gives you a useful reference point, essentially. It's a starting point, it's a checklist. Nothing in here is overly complex, but they will give you demonstrable progress with your clients to make them more secure. So in light of, I guess, all the trends that we've discussed over the last year, what we predict is going to come, how you can stay ahead, I wanted to draw attention to what we've released recently to help keep evolving the usecure product. On the next slide, I will also go through what we have lined up in the future to keep on evolving and further accelerate that. But I wanted to include what we've recently released, as sometimes new features can get a little bit lost in the noise. We are constantly looking for ways to deliver more features, more content. And if you're an existing usecure partner, some of these additions may have passed you by, and they might be an easy thing to implement to, again, keep on building out your usecure value drivers. So a recent release is productivity tools within our simulated phishing attacks. This essentially allows us to mimic the reality of the type of phishing attacks people are experiencing. If your clients are heavy 365 users, we can denote that as a productivity tool for that client, and it will prioritize those phishing attacks for that client, essentially mimicking the reality of the attacks, because again, attackers understand what products are being used and use those for their attacks. It means that we can deliver continual relevant phishing attacks without you having to nurture them, without you having to spend time ticking on which campaigns you're happy with. It frees up time for you to focus on genuine client outcomes and other services that you can wrap around it. For the end users, it means they're more likely to receive relevant phishing programs, things that actually relate to what they use. And that then will build those stronger instincts around those AI generated attacks, which we know are becoming more prominent. And that leads us on to point number 2. We have released AI phishing and deepfake courses. So new training courses, as with all of our content, built by us in-house. So it has the recurring sort of characters, the recurring feel, the recurring length and tone. And this is designed to give you content that, again, reflects the type of threats your clients are genuinely experiencing now, not what they were experiencing 2 or 3 years ago. This is your practical resource to start building that awareness around things that we've been discussing, like voice cloning, video impersonation, AI-driven phishing attacks. We also have things like MFA fatigue attacks in there as well. Again, all tapping into the type of threats we've been discussing today. If you can go to your clients and present them with engaging training on topics that they haven't seen before, it keeps your offering fresh and relevant and differentiated. We've also overhauled our policy management tool, with the setup and tracking being made a lot more streamlined to help make it as easy as possible for you to get on the road to compliance with your clients. Again, the policy management is a huge thing when it comes to compliance and when it comes to building that security culture. Now we can make a policy rollout significantly easier. It's faster to create, to update, to send, to track all of your policies, and help keep them aligned with the different frameworks that are relevant to that organization. We've also released a new end user portal. We know the awareness program is only as effective as the engagement. We can have the best content in the world, the best policies. It doesn't matter if people are ignoring them. So our revamped end user portal makes the experience a lot cleaner for end users. We remove any excuses to engaging with training or policies. We reduce their friction, and we give them more visibility on how they are progressing as an individual. Rather than them just completing a course and moving on, we give them, again, with our revamped portal, a centralized space to understand their individual risk. This is a massive driver to help you as an MSP reinforce engagement levels, reinforce that buy-in, embed this as a standard part of that company process without you having to actually do anything. So it's a really important tool to help improve client stickiness. And finally, what we've also done is we have revamped our course UI. So as your client staff members take our training courses, there is a new user interface to make sure that the training is as clean and as engaging as possible. There is a faster course player to make sure that the videos are delivered in as efficient a way as possible. We want to make sure our training keeps on feeling lightweight, it keeps on feeling non-intrusive, and again continues to be reinforced and increase the likelihood of them just getting into a habit of doing the training. So these are 5 relatively recent updates. They are just the highlights. There are plenty more releases typically each month for you to take advantage of, whether that's new courses, new phishing templates, or new features, which naturally can take sometimes a little bit more time to develop. We're always looking to adapt to these trends that we're seeing in real life. So again, whilst we've been working tirelessly to continue updating our features, to continue updating our content, we're also looking ahead. We feel like just as cybersecurity threats, human risk threats are evolving rapidly, how we handle human risk also has a lot of potential to evolve. And that then brings us on to our upcoming releases. So we wanted to give a quick snippet on what we're working for in 2026. Naturally, this is not an extensive list, and timelines aren't set in stone, but we think it's important that our partners understand the direction of travel in the product, and that we are actively adapting to the trends that we're discussing. We're not just speaking about it, we are taking practical steps to make sure that we can address them within the product. So here are 5 projects that we're investigating and working on, mainly focusing on product and marketing. We want to provide deeper insights into human risk. Again, a large part of what we do is understanding individual threat vectors and then reducing that risk. And whilst we have good coverage in the platform, we feel like there is more room for us to dig deeper into human cyber hygiene. We want to understand, to identify additional gaps when it comes to compliance or when it comes to human behaviors and threats. If we can correlate multiple different security lenses into a singular risk score, it provides much better context and much better insight that we maybe don't have access to at the moment. So if we get that better visibility, those deeper insights into human risk and human behavior, we can then provide simple, concise, actionable insights to reduce that exposure. Again, a lot of what we spoke about was around understanding user behavior, understanding user hygiene. We want to make sure that we can represent that in the application for you. We also want to have greater compliance alignment. As I mentioned, compliance is a huge driver for human risk, and it is only getting stronger. We want to make sure that it's as easy as possible in our product for you to align security awareness programs with the relevant framework and the requirements within. So we want to go beyond training and simulations to cater for those additional compliance needs. We want to make sure that we can provide insight into compliance coverage and provide guidance on where those gaps are and how to remove those gaps. The idea is we want usecure to become your one-stop shop for human cybersecurity. What's linked with that is we are developing more AI-enabled products. We already have tooling that allows us to make our training risk adapted, to make sure that it's as personalized as possible to each user. But we also feel like there is more insight that we could leverage and then use that to guide how we are then essentially empowering the end users. So we want to deliver new AI-driven individualized experiences. That includes things like adaptive training, adaptive phishing, and policy workflows for each individual user. At the moment, the granularity is largely based on the organization, sometimes on groups. We want to, again, as closely as possible, treat each person as an individual and adapt accordingly. So then deliver targeted awareness training based on risk and based on hygiene signals. So based on real life behaviors as much as possible. We're also accelerating our integrations program. We are currently fast tracking integrations with key operational platforms. Initially, PSA tooling is our early focus. We know that a lot of our partners, again, scalability is key. They often will have a set bundle of security products that they incorporate together. They will report on a lot of the same products each month to their customers. The more that we can get complementary products to usecure, speaking with usecure and integrating, the more embedded and the more streamlined your stack becomes. So if we can embed our human risk insights into different security tools and workflows, it helps you as an MSP to have a more essentially efficient delivery of the security products that you are currently providing to your clients. So we want to make sure that we are integrating with the right products to make that as easy as possible for you. The final thing, the final upcoming release is our partner enablement hub. We have a huge amount of content within usecure already, but we are building a single centralized portal that's designed to help you go to market faster. We have consistent ready-made onboarding, sales and marketing materials. So this will include go-to-market guides, product academy videos, white label marketing kits, and sales enablement tools. All of these are curated by us based on what we hear from our partners, based on what we identify our partners needing, and are kept up to date in one space for you. Again, we already have a huge collection of content. The enablement hub allows you to find what you need faster and allows us to create relevant content and adapt our existing content much quicker. So we feel like these 5 points will help to evolve usecure to the next level, and give you more scope to, again, replicate those threat vectors that we've spoken about and ultimately secure your client base. We know human risk is a major issue in cybersecurity, and it's often a neglected one. These trends that we've discussed show that it can't be neglected forever. We know SMBs are increasingly aware of the threats out there. We know there's an increasing pressure from compliance and legislative frameworks. And we know that the clients in the SMB space are more willing than ever to put measures in place to actually address this. It's a great opportunity for us to plug that gap and show our clients that we're aware of the concerns they have, the threats they experience, how they're evolving, and we can ultimately provide them with a fit for purpose solution that will actually help their employees. So hopefully that was a useful overview of where we see the human risk space at the moment. We are happy to field any questions as well at the end of the session.
Thanks, Nahil. Yeah, I think that was a really insightful session to go through some of the review of this past year and what's to come for next year. We have a question that has been popped in the chat box. Will these new threads be added also in the gap analysis? If so, how to push the new courses to the client that did the gap with the old courses?
Yeah, it's a good question. That's something that we are very conscious of. So recently we actually updated some of the topics that are covered in the gap analysis because, again, as we've discussed, those threats evolve. One thing that we're looking to do with those, again, the things that we've got planned, is being able to make it easier to incorporate those new modules within the automation. So there are ways to do it manually currently within usecure as we release these new courses, but we're conscious of making sure that we can embed these new courses with longer term clients as efficiently as possible. The plans that we have coming up in 2026 will essentially allow you to do that. In the meantime, it's pretty quick to do it. I would recommend speaking with your account manager for guidance on how to do so. But there are a couple of little shortcuts basically that make it more easier to deploy those at the moment.
Well, another question. Is there a training video on AI age deception that we can share with potential clients?
We have a few different AI specific training courses. I don't think we have one specifically on just AI-led deception as a whole, but we do have ones on things like AI-led phishing, for example. So if you reach out to your account manager, they'll be able to send you a list of the AI-specific training courses that we have, and again, give you advice on how to deploy them as well.
Brilliant. I don't think we have any more questions coming through. I know we've got a few minutes left. Oh, one more question. When will the new partner enablement hub go live? Is there a date?
I don't think we have a go live date.
I think I could probably answer this one. We're probably trying to look at whether we can get something out before the end of the year. We're still working on it at the moment, but at least by the start of the year, I'd expect that to be out. So I know that's not a specific answer, but we will be sending out communications on that. So just make sure to check your email because it will be coming out through there. So hopefully within the next month, we will have sort of a soft launch of the initial version of that. Great. So obviously following today, as mentioned at the start, you will receive a recording of today's webinar via email within about 24 hours of today's session. If you do have any more questions at all, then feel free to reach out to your account manager. If you've got any other queries or any marketing related queries, feel free to reach out to myself at marketing@usecure.io. But thank you everyone for joining today, and thank you, Nahil, for a great session, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you, everyone.